Let me replay 14 seconds of me from this program yesterday. See if you remember this. This is not news to anybody who has known of this guy. This guy's a big Democrat. The only reason he's in trouble right now is he did not give enough money to Obama. Okay, that was your host, your beloved, lovable, harmless fuzzball host, El Rushmo, talking about Donald Sterling at the open of the program.
Yeah.
Making a joke. The only reason that Donald Sterling's is given to Democrat causes left and right, the NAACP, but he must not have given enough to Obama. Well, over at CNN, they interpreted that to mean that I was defending Sterling. How did they get there? I don't know how they get there. Aaron Burnett played the soundbite and then went to Mr. Black Hole himself, Don Lemon, who sleeps with men, proudly.
Really? For
comment, and this is what he said.
If we didn't know now, if we didn't know then that Rush Limbaugh is a stunt king, then we know now. Because there's no excuse for this behavior. There's no excuse for anyone to try to make an excuse for someone like Donald Sterling. Clearly, he's just trying to get the attention.
Trying to get the attention, yeah.
They took
ratings.
A discussion of Sterling and turned it into my behavior. And there's no question, they got this in Media Matters. You know, it remains true. These people have no sense of humor, particularly when it comes to Obama.
Really?
They have no sense of humor whatsoever. Everybody listening to this program knew I was making a joke.
A joke?
Quite good one.
A quite good one.
By the way, if I say so myself,
really?
If Sterling had just given a little bit more to Obama, everything would be okay.
That was a joke. Really? Everybody listening knew that was a joke. Here's what I always tell my daughter when she says she does something like, you know, that I find questionable, and she goes, Mom, it was a joke. And I say, a joke is supposed to be funny. He said it was quite funny, if he does say so himself. Okay, we gotta dissect this. Welcome back, hour 2 of the Wednesday edition of the Randi Rhodes Show. I'm Nicole Sandler of RadioOrNot.com, in for Randy if you're just joining us. So, okay, look, this guy just blames everybody else for everything. First of all, that's what he said. He said this.
This is not news to anybody who has known of this guy. This guy's a big Democrat. The only reason he's in trouble right now is he did not give enough money to Obama.
Okay, I guess that was the laugh line. Did you get that was a joke? Sean, was that a joke?
It did not in any way sound like a joke. It sounded like he didn't know what party that...
right, and of course, you know, he's lying because that's what they do over there. They make stuff up, right? So now he gets called on it, and he says this.
I was making a joke, and a quite good one. By the way, if I say so myself.
No, because a really good joke you laugh at. And then... you know, he said, those people...
These people have no sense of humor, particularly when it comes to Obama.
Okay, these people have no sense of humor, particularly when it comes to Obama. So I thought, you know, let me do a little research, and I didn't have to go very far to find out that, yes, indeed, we really do have a sense of humor, and so does Obama about Obama. All right, like, there's this.
These days I look in the mirror and I have to admit, I'm not the strapping young Muslim socialist that I used to be.
Kind of funny, right? Yeah, see, I didn't have to go back very far. That was just last year, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where actually President Obama, his self-deprecating humor was even funnier than what Conan O'Brien did as headliner. Now, this Saturday night is the 2014 White House Correspondents' Dinner. Joel McHale is the headliner this year. Now, personally... my favorite performance ever at the White House Correspondents' Dinner with Stephen Colbert. With George W. Bush sitting right there, Stephen Colbert took him apart. And you could almost see the smoke coming out of Bush's ears, right? He was so angry. He was just shaking, right? And the right-wingers didn't get it. You know, at the time, I was working at a right-wing radio station producing a morning show for a couple of months, and I came in the next morning just like thinking, oh my God, or that following Monday, that was hysterical. I pulled audio, and the host there, that wasn't funny at all. It was right. You see, who doesn't have a sense of humor, Rush?
These people have no sense of humor, particularly when it comes to Obama.
Particularly when it comes to Obama. Really?
The media landscape is changing so rapidly. You can't keep up with it. I mean, I remember when BuzzFeed was just something I did in college around 2 a.m.
Yeah, you know, really.
It's true.
It's true, yeah. You see, that's a sense of humor. That's a guy who can laugh at himself and laugh at the way he's being ridiculed, right? That, to me, is a sense of humor. And by the way, those are jokes, and good jokes that evoke laughter.
I was making a joke, and a quite good one. By the way, if I say so myself.
Yeah. Okay, you say so yourself. All right, phone lines are open, 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634. Mark in San Francisco, listening online. Hi.
Hi, Nicole. How you doing?
Doing okay. What's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to talk about the fact that there, Donald Sterling got banned, and there was, there's an outrage about his remarks, which is, I love the NBA, and there's no place for an owner like that. But to me, where's the outrage about the Republican Party and their racist policies towards minorities? Voter ID, they're restricting African American and other minorities from voting. Where's the outrage there? Where's the outrage about the Ryan budget that slices and dices the minorities and the low-income people in this country to shreds? Where's the outrage about, just overall Republican, their policies and their disdain for the poor and the minorities in this country? Where's the outrage for that?
Really good question, and that's what I've been asking. I mean, look, I spent Monday asking, where's the outrage over, the people with the biggest microphones who are on hundreds of radio stations, over-the-air radio stations around the country, spouting racist epithets, saying horrible things about the president and the first lady and people of color and poor people. I mean, blaming people living in poverty as being for their own situation because they're lazy. I mean, really? Where is the outrage over that? Why is that guy still making, taking in $30 million a year while Randy's show goes away? These are the things I don't understand. Where's the outrage? Look, one of the other things I was going to say about, I went to the Springsteen concert. Music is my escape. I love good music. It's just, I'm so thankful there are artists out there who move me, right? And there are people just that love basketball. So I get that, basketball is a big thing for a lot of people. But who the hell is Donald Sterling? He's an old guy who, before this weekend, I would guarantee you 99% of the people out there never heard his name before, didn't know. But I'll tell you what, the people in the NBA knew. They knew that he was a racist, that he was a bigot, that he was a slumlord, that he was a despicable human being, and they did nothing until these tapes came out and there was this, major public outcry. Why did it take so long? I think that's the question Magic Johnson was asking. That's the question that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was asking. And why isn't there more outrage over the stuff we hear every single day in this country?
Well, not only that, Nicole, but what about the Congress that does absolutely nothing to help this country, collects government pension and health care, and Paul Ryan and these guys are going to Washington just sabotaging the country, doing absolutely nothing, and then turning around and degrading African Americans and minorities in this country. Where's the outrage or the call out on those guys that basically are just sponging off the government and doing real harm to this country? I'm really angry. I'm like you. I hear these voices, the propaganda from the right, and all it is poisoning the airwaves. And the real truth tellers are being silenced.
Yeah.
It's an outrage. It really is.
Look, I am frustrated too. I studied broadcasting in college a long time ago. I've been doing this for a long time. And when I studied broadcast law, I learned about things like the fairness doctrine, like ascertainment. We had, before the Telecommunications Act of 1996, that was Bill Clinton's law. Gotta place the blame where it's due. Radio stations and television stations, but look, we're talking radio here. Radio stations, when they went to renew their license, and again, remember, the companies don't own the airwaves. They have a license to broadcast over that place on the, the radio spectrum, on the public airwaves. They're licensed to do it. And they used to have to prove that they are operating in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. That's the exact phrase. And there was a process called ascertainment, where somebody from the station had to go out into the community and had to do this, I think it was every year, and keep the files in a public file and show the 10 most pressing issues facing the community and how their station was addressing those issues, how they were serving the community. All that went away. And now, radio, the reason I loved radio was because it was a local medium. It served the market in which it was based. It was one-on-one. It was personal. And now it's just, it's just generic for the most part stuff that's just sent out there, and it's at the corporate bidding. It's one-sided because the fairness doctrine is dead. There's no requirement to present both sides of an issue, or at least opposing points of view. There's nothing, and now what we're getting is one-sided propaganda. And again, where's the outrage?
No, it's really a shame, and it is an outrage. And you know what, Nicole? If it wasn't for music, I don't know what I'd do, because I love music too, and it's an outlet for me with all this madness.
Yep, and there's, Bruce Springsteen last night, and he ended the show with Thunder Road. He must have heard I was going to be there. And, I couldn't help but think of Randy when, the last strains of the song, when he sings, it's a town full of losers, and I'm pulling out of here to win. We love
Randi. We love her. We're going to miss her.
I love her so much, too. And, hopefully she'll take a little rest and come back. And she's got an open invitation to join me anytime at radioornot.com, as much as she wants to. So hopefully she'll take me up on that.
And I'll follow you on your station as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back with more of your calls. 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634. Also coming up in a few minutes, Ari Berman from the Nation. It's a Nation Day here on the Randi Rhodes Show, who's been on with us many times talking about voting rights. In fact, he's writing a book on voting rights since 1965, and he'll discuss what happened in Wisconsin. I think it was just yesterday, a federal court overturned the Wisconsin voter ID law, and we'll explain why it's not voter ID per se that's bad. It's the way the Republicans are trying to use it, restrictive voter ID regulations, that's bad. All right, Nicole for Randi. We'll be right back.
Dinner with a number of the Republican senators. And I'll admit it wasn't easy. I proposed a toast. It died in committee.
Now that's funny, right? That's funny, right? Obama poking fun at himself? Funny.
The only reason he's in trouble right now is he did not give enough money to Obama.
Not funny. No, not funny, right?
I know Republicans are still sorting out what happened in 2012, but one thing they all agree on is they need to do a better job reaching out to minorities. And look, call me self-centered, but I can think of one minority they could start with.
Funny! That's funny, right? Funny! Hello? That funny, right? And this?
Don Lemon, who sleeps with men, proudly.
Was that a joke, too? Because guess what, Rush? Not funny. Funny, not funny. Got it? All right, Nicole for Randi, let's get back to the phones at 866-87-RANDY, 866-877-2634. Michelle in the gorgeous Santa Cruz, California, listening on AM 910. Hey, Michelle.
Oh, yeah, and it is gorgeous to stay out here, too.
Michelle? Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I gotcha. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it is gorgeous out here, too. I just wanted to respond to the gentleman that called and asked, where is the outrage? And I have a suggestion. Take a look at the difference between the strong union representation in the NBA and the whittled away at representation that people do or do not have in the teachers' union and workers' rights.
Interesting.
That's a huge difference.
Interesting.
And also the commercial endorsements.
Yeah.
Now, since the oligarchy runs the newspapers and the TV stations and the radio stations, I'll bet that a lot of people that want to talk about it, reasonable people that want to talk about it on the air, they have to step a little lightly because of who owns the station.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
There's the outrage right there.
Yep.
They don't have any power, and that's all well-crafted plan. It's by design.
No, you're right. And Michelle, I really appreciate you bringing up about the teachers. You know, and professional athletes, they all belong to unions. And it's funny, you don't hear the right-wingers going nuts over the players' unions, whether it's the NBA or the MLB. Right? But the teachers, and we are going to deal with education tomorrow because it's a big issue. It's a big issue that needs to be talked about, and no one's really discussing it, except they're lying to you about, charter schools. They're lying to you about, the teachers' unions. You're being fed so much misinformation. It's pretty sickening.
Oh, I know that. My mother was a teacher. I have friends who are teachers, and I took my son out of public schools. But the other thing I wanted to say is that everyone who is giving you a very well-oiled story about union representation and Affordable Care Act, they all have really good health care, and they are all in a union. Every single one of them.
Well, look, the reason we have a 40-hour work week is because of unions. The reason you have weekends off and paid vacation, right, is because of unions. And look, they can only go so far. Other civilized countries, other industrialized nations have paid maternity leave and paid paternity leave. They take care of.
You don't have to go that far. Ask anyone if they really want to work extra and not get paid time and a half.
Or get paid.
They'll look at you like you're crazy.
You know, in the fast food industry, what they're doing now for the people who are having to slave over, the fast food work for minimum wage, they're also being made to clock out and then keep working off the clock. The atrocities that go on in American industry, and people do it because they need the work. They don't want to lose the job.
Yeah.
And worker protections came from unions. And I don't get people who vote against their own best interests, but it happens constantly. And if you listen to right-wing talk radio, you hear all the ditto heads calling in and talking, vilifying unions, who are the ones who got the middle class elevated in this nation, and as we've seen the decline of the unions, we've seen the death of the middle class in this country. Thank you for the call, Michelle. There was a report just a few days ago that the United States middle class has fallen behind Canada and other nations as well. We used to have the strongest middle class in the industrialized world. Not anymore. Our wages have remained stagnant. They've remained flat over the last few decades. And in other countries, Canada, our neighbors to the north, their middle class has risen and risen while we've stayed flat. It doesn't bode well for the future unless we change things. And by change, I don't mean electing Republicans to take over the Senate or the White House. We need a progressive movement. Nicole for Randy. We'll be right back.
866-877-2634. Now, back to Randi Rhodes.
A phenomenon that is called perpetuation of racial entitlement. Whenever a society adopts racial entitlements, it is very difficult to get out of them through the normal political processes.
Ew. Welcome back to the Randi Rhodes Show. I'm Nicole Sandler, and that was Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia during the oral arguments when they were hearing a challenge to the Voting Rights Act back in March of last year. Antonin Scalia. Just last week, we got the decision from the Supreme Court basically striking down affirmative action for public colleges because, racism is over, so they tell us. Yet we see since the Supreme Court did strike down an important provision of the Voting Rights Act, state after state, coincidentally those states run by Republicans, enacting all of these voter suppression tactics, like voter ID restrictions. We're not talking just, voter ID. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's unnecessary because there's no voter fraud, but, it's the way they're doing this, the rules with which they are requiring, the rules surrounding the voter ID. The person who we've gone to for years when we're talking about voting rights is Ari Berman. He's a contributing writer for The Nation. He's also working on a book about voting rights since 1965. So I guess, Ari, you are the expert on this right now, huh?
Hey, thank you. And I'm staying busy, Nicole.
I'll bet you are.
Between trying to research the history of it, which is fascinating, and then trying to keep on track of all the different states that continue to restrict voting rights. It's definitely two jobs at this point.
Right. It's a daunting task, I can imagine. But there was big news yesterday, and in fact, over at The Nation, you wrote yesterday, I love the way it starts. You wrote, at 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN announced that L.A. Clippers owner Donald Sterling had been banned from the NBA for life for his racist remarks. 7 minutes later, at 2:24 p.m., the ACLU tweeted that a Wisconsin judge had struck down the state's voter ID law because it disproportionately burdened black and Hispanic voters. And then you say both decisions were striking affirmations of Justice Sonia Sotomayor's dissent last week in a Michigan affirmative action case that race matters. And that just gave me goosebumps. Race matters.
Well, Sonia Sotomayor's dissent last week was incredibly powerful, and I kept wanting to write about it, but I was busy with other stuff, and then I was thinking a lot about it in the voting rights context, because there really are kind of two beliefs of what kind of society we are right now. There is the belief of John Roberts and four other justices, by and large, on the court, who believe that voting discrimination and related discrimination is largely a thing of the past, and that even if it exists, that the government really can't take any remedies to do anything about it, because that would be unconstitutional. That, in John Roberts' famous words, the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And Sotomayor basically said that quote-unquote colorblind ideology is totally out of touch with reality, because the reality is that race matters, that discrimination is ongoing. And one of the things that she said to point to her contention that discrimination is ongoing is all the attempts to restrict voting on the basis of race. And so when you look at this Wisconsin voter ID decision, the reason the judge struck down the Wisconsin voter ID law is because, number one, 300,000 registered voters in Wisconsin, 9% of registered voters don't have the government-issued ID required by the state. But number two, that blacks and Hispanics were disproportionately more likely to not have that ID and disproportionately more likely to not have access to that ID because they're more likely to live in poverty, because they're more likely to be working jobs where they can't get to a DMV between 9 and 5, because they were born outside of Wisconsin and thus they have to jump through all these hoops to get a birth certificate. So for a whole variety of reasons, the judge in this 90-page opinion showed how the voter ID law is racially discriminatory. And that kind of deep structural racism is what Sonia Sotomayor is talking about. It's not just the Donald Sterling comments that get all the attention. It's the fact that in our political system right now, we're putting up new structural roadblocks on the basis of race. And I think that's the real story of what's going on right now.
You're so right. So Ari, the Supreme Court striking down the affirmative action rule in Michigan, that was a big deal. That does not bode well for the future. And so what happened yesterday is it was a federal court that struck down Wisconsin's voter ID law. I'm guessing they're going to challenge that and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And if it's this court, Sonia Sotomayor and her passionate dissent will be outvoted, won't it?
Well, they're sort of different issues.
Okay.
The court in the Michigan case upheld Michigan's ban on affirmative action.
Okay.
So
because they're saying the voters had a right to do that.
Exactly.
All right.
They didn't get into the whole merits of affirmative action.
Gotcha.
I don't think Anthony Kennedy is ready yet to say that affirmative action is unconstitutional in a way that the other justices on the conservative side of the aisle are. But Kennedy was basically saying, we're not going to overturn this Michigan law. Now, with Wisconsin, it's a different situation. You have a judge who basically ruled that the voter ID law violated the 14th Amendment and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court has not yet gutted. So the question is, if this goes back before the Supreme Court, are they going to say, hey, we're actually going to gut another section of the Voting Rights Act? Because what they said when they gutted the Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, the requirement that states with the worst history of discrimination have to approve their voting changes with the federal government, what they said was, you can use these other sections of the Voting Rights Act, like Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which applies nationwide, but is much harder to litigate under, because under Section 2, the burden of proof is on plaintiffs, like in Wisconsin, the ACLU and the people they represent. They had to prove discrimination, whereas previously under Section 4 and 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the states that were doing the discrimination, they had to prove that what they were doing wasn't discriminatory. So there's a huge legal shift here. These Section 2 cases are difficult to win. A voter ID law had never been challenged successfully under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So this is a very good sign, at least temporarily, because it means that other sections of the Voting Rights Act can be used to challenge these new types of voting restrictions. And big litigation right now in North Carolina and Texas by the Justice Department and other groups is under Section 2. So this could be the wave of the future in terms of legal challenges to these kind of laws.
Now, Ari Berman of The Nation is with us. Now, let's talk about what is wrong with these voter ID laws that are being enacted around the country in these, Republican-ruled states. It's not voter ID per se. Look, if they're just saying, look, we just want to double check, we want to be safe, not that there's really any problem with voter fraud because we're not seeing it, but bring some form of ID to show that you are who you say you are, and we're good to go. But what we're seeing in state, and for instance, North Carolina, you brought up, enacted one of the most egregious voter ID laws in the country, if I remember correctly, and Texas has one, and Arizona has one, and for instance, and I guess it changes from state to state, but in many of these states, in some of these states, for instance, your ID from a state university is not good enough to use as voter ID, but your gun license is?
Yeah,
that's
the case of Texas. So I think the problem with voter ID, as you mentioned, is not the ID part. It's that they're requiring very specific forms of government-issued ID that not everybody has, number one. So one myth is that everyone has ID. Every qualified voter has ID. And the judge in Wisconsin said very clearly 300,000 registered voters do not have this ID, nearly 10% of the electorate. The second thing is that getting this ID is not so easy, that you have to jump through a number of hoops. If you don't have a driver's license, you have to have an underlying document, like a birth certificate, to be able to get that document. If you don't have a birth certificate, sometimes it's very difficult to get a birth certificate. So you start to get in this Kafka-esque situation where if you don't have one document, you need another document that you can't get because you don't have the previous document. And so you're seeing people, particularly the lead plaintiff in this case is an 84-year-old woman who's voted in pretty much every election since 1948. I mean, she had a very difficult time obtaining her birth certificate to get her ID. And this is a situation where why are we putting people through all these different hoops, hurdles, when there's no reason, there's no fraud to justify the law? And that's what the judge said. The judge says you have to weigh the benefits versus the burdens. And he basically said the burdens of people who don't have this ID and the difficulty in getting them totally outweigh the benefits of whatever requiring this ID would have, because he said that it's absolutely clear that more legitimate votes will be prevented than fraudulent votes, because there was no evidence of voter impersonation fraud in Wisconsin to justify the law.
Right, that's it. It's, people have said it's a solution in search of a problem. The problem doesn't exist, and these voter ID laws that are being put in place are costing taxpayers millions of dollars, right? But I think I think the intended consequence by those who are putting these laws in place is to keep certain people from voting. And those certain people...
I mean, it's obvious who doesn't have the ID.
Of course.
We've looked at this very clearly. We have very good data now. It's disproportionately blacks and Hispanics who don't have this kind of ID. The laws have been passed in places like North Carolina and Texas to prevent college students from using their ID. We know that their lower-income individuals are disproportionately likely to not have a driver's license and not have public transportation to get to a DMV office, particularly if these DMV offices, like in Wisconsin, are only open from 9 to 5, only certain days a week. And so I don't think it's just like Republicans got up one day and said, you know what would be a good idea? Everyone should have ID. They looked at the data. They knew what they were doing. That's why these laws have been introduced in state after state in virtually identical forms. That's why Republicans in Wisconsin are saying they're going to have a special session on voter ID before the 2014 election when there's a hotly contested governor's race. So, I mean, the reason they're rushing to pass these laws all over the country is because it's all about politics, because as you mentioned earlier, there's no evidence of voter fraud to justify the need for them.
Right. So Ari, and it's, I mean, this is a positive sign, and at a time when we could use some good news. You wrote that the judge found that Wisconsin's ID law overwhelmingly impacted lower-income voters, and that blacks and Latinos in Wisconsin are disproportionately likely to live in poverty. The judge said, yes, this voter ID law had a clear discriminatory impact. So good. Finally, I mean, a ruling that is on the right side of history, of the law. But back to, last year's Supreme Court ruling that threw it back to Congress, really, right? It said, you find a solution for these problems for Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act that basically makes Section 5 unenforceable. Obviously, Congress can't get anything done. So what's going to happen with that?
Well, so Congress has drafted a new formula for Section 4 to update the states that are covered and to make it based on more current voting violations. It's not as expansive as the previous formula for obvious reasons. This is very hard to do. It's hard to figure out which states should be singled out to have to approve their voting changes with the federal government, and it's difficult to figure out what the qualifications are that would, A, be able to pass Congress, and then B, would be able to satisfy the Supreme Court, because if any legislation is passed to update the Voting Rights Act, it's going right back to the Supreme Court. And so the thing they worked out, I think, is a pretty good compromise. I mean, it covers 4 or 5 of the worst offenders in the South, and it incentivizes other states not to discriminate, because otherwise, if they have 5 violations, they can then be bailed in to have to approve their voting changes with the federal government. And it's based on violations in the last 15 years, so presumably that would be a current enough period of time to satisfy Chief Justice Roberts. But everyone is kind of guessing here. And, I mean, you can basically believe that John Roberts is the ultimate political strategist. He knew when he struck down Section 4 and said, go back and do this, Congress, that Congress was never going to be able to agree on what to do. So right now, I mean, there is legislation. The Republicans have not pledged to do anything to advance it. You basically have Jim Sensenbrenner, the former chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Republican of Wisconsin, being the sole Republican who keeps speaking out about the need for the Voting Rights Act. Eric Cantor claims that he would be supportive of this, but he has not taken a position in support of it. So this is something that people just have to keep pushing away on. Senator Leahy, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, just said that he's going to hold a hearing on voting rights in June. So that is a good sign. But right now, nothing is really happening legislatively with the fix for the Voting Rights Act. All the real fights are in court right now.
Wow. And one last question, Ari. When is your book going to be out?
The book's going to be out next year on the 50th anniversary of the voting.
Okay. Well, we look forward to that. Ari Berman, thank you for staying on top of this. It is a very, very important issue, and obviously there's action here, and it's nice to know we can always count on you to get the story of what's happening.
Hey, Nicole. Good to talk to you.
You too. Bye-bye. Ari Berman of The Nation. The piece that he wrote about Wisconsin striking down the voter ID law is posted in the homework section at randyrhodes.com. All right, Nicole Sandler for Randi Rhodes. We got a busy next hour, too. The latest on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What happened during the president's trip to Asia? And the funny with John for Randi. After the top of the hour break, we're going to speak with Melinda St. Louis of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch to find out what the latest is on that Trans-Pacific Partnership. But I want to take our next call. Mark Taylor Canford has a piece up at Daily Kos about a conference that went on this weekend, the National Minimum Wage Campaign, and it's a campaign for $15 an hour minimum wage. Forget the fact that, you know, the Senate Republicans today filibustered the cloture vote on to open debate on raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. There is a movement gaining steam nationwide for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Nicole. I have to say, Randi could not have picked a better guest host.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate what you're doing over there.
Thanks.
At Radio or Not.
No, I appreciate that.
And as far as her announcement, that's sad because here in Seattle we've had to form a group called Progressive Radio Northwest to try to bring back some of these independent voices on the air. And wait for it, I have an announcement. Looks like I'm going to have my own radio program next month on a new independent network. So some of us are going to try to pick up the slack where Randi's leaving off.
That's great. Well, let me know about that, and we can talk about it over at Radio or Not as well. But we've only got about a couple of minutes here, so I want to find out what went on last weekend in Seattle.
The first ever national $15 an hour minimum wage conference, and folks can go to 15now.org to get more information. But we had David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist.
In fact, he'll be here on Friday. He'll be on the show Friday here.
Awesome. Check his stuff out. Divided, his newest book, The Perils of Economic Inequality.
That's what we'll be talking about.
We also had Glenn Ford from Black Agenda Report and our own local blogger at Horse's Ass, David Goldstein, to talk about this citywide initiative that's been already submitted for November. The City Council has not moved on Kshama Sawant, our new council member's initiative to bring a $15 an hour minimum wage to Seattle. So the people have gotten together, filed their own charter amendment, and it will be on the ballot in November if they can get the 50,000 signatures they need. In the community of SeaTac, Washington, just south of Seattle, they actually did vote on a Proposition 1 citywide initiative to bring about a $15 an hour minimum wage in SeaTac, Washington.
Right.
Unfortunately, the Superior Court judge
overruled it, right.
The International Airport is not covered.
Right. And in fact, there's the Fast Food Forward campaign in New York, Fight for 15 in Chicago. This may have to happen locally and spread across the country like that. 15now.org. Mark Taylor Camford, thanks so much for that. Nicole for Randi. We'll be back.